Hello and welcome back to our series on beginning app script for HR, brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions. And in today's video, I'd like to carry on where we left off. And what we were doing was we wrote a function that was connected to a sheet. And what we wanted our function to do was to go to a cell at row 3, column 2, and then get the value of that cell. And in the previous videos, we got that value, and then we learned to set a value, a single value. And we also learned that if we declare a variable with let, we can change the value of that variable, whatever it is stored. So here, when we go over to our sheet here, we have data, and this data's changed. I was doing something else with it. But what that piece was doing when we were writing individual cells is we were starting here having the value of that variable be one thing, go to the next row, change that value, and then set it, and so on. So let's go back and let's just run this code. And come back here to our sheet, and you'll see that we set a value, change the value in that variable, and then use that variable again with the new value to set it. So we learned to change our values within our variables. And then we also got multiple cell data in the form of ranges. And this one was starting at row 1, column 1. We included 4 rows and 2 columns, and then we got the value of that. And when we run this, we log that out, and we've seen that it came to us in this 2-dimensional array. And anytime that we pull think of it as a box of cells, anytime that we pull a box of cells that includes multiple rows and multiple columns, it's going to come to us in the form of a 2-dimensional array. Now this here is a 1-dimensional array because it only includes one set of square brackets. And we were able to pull out individual pieces from a 1-dimensional array by isolating or identifying what index we wanted to grab. So with arrays, remember, arrays are 0-based or index-based, so they start at 0. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3. And in a 2-dimensional array, this initial array is 0, this initial array is 1, and then we can collapse it down further, like this logger right here. This log right here is accessing this variable, and it's only going to the second index of that initial level of array. So 0, 1, 2, and that's the reason why it's pulling this whole array. If we wanted to drill into that array and say pull 24, we would then go 0, 1, and then indicate that we are drilling down into that array further like that. And then when we run this, it'll log out that drill down value. So now when we think about writing, say we want to write all of this to a spreadsheet. For that, we would use not set value, we would use set values. Now, set values requires the data to be a specific way. So as an example, let's try and write, and we'll do this at 6-1. Let's try and write setting values, and the values that we would like to set are these right here, this array 2D. So if we were just to write array 2D in here and try to run this, we would throw an error. And the reason we're throwing an error is because it wants it in a two-dimensional array, as you can see right here, which this is a two-dimensional array. But the reason that we're going to throw an error is because our landing spot has to equal the size of that array. So you can see the row needs to be 4. So let's change that. So we want to include 4. And then when we try to run it again, you'll see that now it's working on the columns. So the columns, there are 2 columns in our two-dimensional array, but the range we're trying to get only has 1. So if we change this to 2, now our square box, our range here, let me erase this. We're starting here and we're including 4 rows and 2 columns. So our box is equal to the box of our data. In this case, our array. So now if we were to run this, we do not get the error because everything matches. And when we go over to our sheet, you'll see that we actually were able to populate our values. So when we're dealing with get values, there are 2 things to remember. Or not get values, excuse me, that was my fault. Set values. When we're trying to set the values, there are 2 things that we need to remember. One, the range, I'll call this the landing range, needs to be equal to the size of the 2D array. And also, inside the parentheses must be a 2D array. So now let's say we want to write the values of, let's say we want to write this Joe 56. So that's only 1 row. So instead of this, oops, that's not going to work. There we go. Instead of using this, let's try sheet.getRange. Now we know it's 1 row, so let's start this at row 6, column 1. We know it's 1 row, and we also know that it's 2 columns. There we go. We'll start that again here. So sheet get range 6.1 is where we want to start. We know it's 1 row, 2 columns, and then we want to set the values. And we're going to use this array 2D. So what we're wanting to do is to set this whole thing, which is 1 row and has 2 columns. And to get that, we would just initially think that we just go 0, 1. But now if we do that, we're only pulling this 1 array. Because you'll see we did that previously here. So if we were to log this out, say 1, how we have it written there, and then run this, you'll see that it's coming to us in a 1-dimensional array. It's pulling out that array from that 2-dimensional array. So it's just grabbing this and yanking it out, making it a 1 array. So if we were to try to run this and set the values here, we would get an error. And the reason we're getting an error is because set values requires it to be in a 2-dimensional array. So when we pull an array out of an array, it becomes a 1-dimensional array. So we have to then transform it back into a 2-dimensional array. And to do that, you remember a 2-dimensional array is just encased in a second set of square brackets, so we can simply encase it. So now it becomes a 2-dimensional array. Essentially what it looks like is this. Joe and 56.0. That's what it looks like. And we can see this by doing it in our log. And you'll see that's exactly how it's going to look. And that is what setValues needs in order to write it. So then we can see that starting at row 6, column 1, we want to include 1 row, which we have, and 2 columns. So I just came over to our sheet and I deleted the values of that. As you can see, I deleted that whole box because now when we run it, it's going to populate Joe 56 right here because we met the criteria that is being required. So now when we run this and come back over here, you'll see that Joe 56 is populated. So this works if we're wanting to write data to a single row or a block of data to another row. Let's go back to our code here and let's do one more example. So let's do another array. Let's do we'll do new array. And let's have that equal to a 2-dimensional array. So we can write it on one line here, or what we can do is break it up. So we can do it like this, and then create other arrays. So let's do this as, we'll do name, and then we'll do salary. Actually, before salary, let's do division, and then we'll do salary. And this is your first row. And I like doing it this way if I'm writing it directly to a sheet because it makes me realize that this is how it's going to look in the sheet. And I'll show you what I mean. So our next array within this array or row is going to be, let's go Bob. And then Bob's division is, let's say facilities. And Bob's salary is, let's just say 56,000. And then let's do a couple more here. We'll do Beth. I know I'm using the same names over, sorry. Facilities. Let's say Beth is in finance and no idea what her job is, but we'll just say it's 68,000, and we'll do one more here. And this is going to be, let's see, Pat. And Pat is going to be in, let's just say operations. And Pat makes 85. Okay, good. So now we have a 2-dimensional array. And when I'm writing to a sheet, what I really like to think about is how it's going to land in that sheet. So if I write it like this, it takes a little extra thought. But if I was to write it like this, I can see that this is one row and name is in a column, division is in a column, and salary is in a column. This is the next row. Bob, facilities, salary. So let's try to write this new array into our sheet. So let's go sheet, get range, and let's just put it right up there at top. Let's just override everything. So starting at row 1, column 1. Now we need to know how many rows we have. Well, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And we need to know how many columns. 1, 2, 3. So now if we were to just go in here and say set values, it's expecting a 2-dimensional array, as you can see. But this is already a two-dimensional array, so we can run that variable straight to it. We hit run, come back over here, and you'll notice that it is populating exactly how we had it written. So that is a good way, if you're writing to a sheet, to visualize your variable in a way that it's going to appear. See, that was that first array. This was that second array, and then this whole thing, this whole box here, was also an array that contained all these individual arrays. So that's another good way to think about it. And another way that we can write data, which is going to be a lot more helpful depending on what it is you're doing. Like, say we just wanted to write a new row of data. So if we wanted to just write a single row of data, we could use a different method. And you'll notice that each method takes a different array size. So we know setValues takes a two-dimensional array. So if you have a two-dimensional array, you can just set it with setValues as long as the cells match. What we could also do is what's called an appendRow. appendRow. And you'll see that appendRow is a method, and it requires in parentheses because we got to let it know what it is that we're wanting to append. Now, when we hit the parentheses, you'll see that it's wanting the row contents, in a one-dimensional array. So anytime that you see just one set of square brackets, that's one level. That is one-dimensional. If you remember, our setValues had two square brackets. So this requires a one-dimensional array. So if we were to just come in here and say new array, and then try to write that thing, what would end up happening is coming over here, it is forcing it to be a one-dimensional array. But it's not coming to us as a one-dimensional array. It's coming to us as a two-dimensional array, and we're just trying to shove it in there and make it fit. And this is not very helpful at all. Not very helpful at all. So what we need to do is we need to take our new array, this, and make it into a one array. And we can collapse arrays down to specific levels. So what we can do is let's create another variable, and I'll show you what I mean. And we'll say let new array flat, so now you know what method we're going to use, equal new array. And then what we can do is add a property onto that, and you'll see that our new array is a two-dimensional array thanks to this toolbar here. What we can do is hit dot, and what we're wanting to do is use this flat method. And what this flat method is going to do is it's going to take that and reduce it down to one level. Now let's log this out here and see actually what it does. And what I'll do is I will comment this appendRow out because I don't want that running. So let's do that. And you'll see what it did was it took our two-dimensional array here and turned it into a one-dimensional array. So now what we can do is it thinks that, let me go back here. So with this being a one-dimensional array, there's no columns. It is just a single row, one row. So if we were to now come back here and try to push that appending the row with that variable, with the flattened variable now, and we hit run, and come back over here, you'll notice that since it's just a one-dimensional array, it is a single row. So it just produces a single row. But what we can also do when we're thinking of arrays, let me get rid of all this here. What we can do when we're dealing with arrays is the same thing that we did with variables. We could take this two-dimensional array here, we can flatten it, and then we can, cut out indexes, create another variable, or what we could do is create a one-dimensional array, and instead of this new array flat, we can create another variable using that two-dimensional array. Like say we just want to get Bob Facilities and append the row. Well, remember, we did that. We pulled out one-dimensional array right here. So let's create another variable and see if we can take just Bob Facilities and store it so we can append that row. So here you are. We just want to grab Bob Facilities 56. Let's create another variable. Let's call this one, let's just call it new employee. Why not? So I think we have new employee, but we have it commented out. Yep. And then what we're going to set that, we'll do one. What we're going to set that variable to now is this index of that array. So we want to new array, we want to reference that, and then we want to isolate the 0, 1 index. And now if we were to log this out, new employee 1, what would end up happening is we would see that that new variable only contains that one row. So now what we can do is we pulled that out. It is one row. We can actually append that. And anytime that we use appendRow, it is always the last row. And instead of this new array, we want to do new employee 1. Let me go back over here and make sure I remove this. There we go. And you'll notice that with appendRow, we don't need to give it a range. And the reason we don't need to give it a range is appendRow will go down to the very last row and just add that row. It'll add to it. So if we're thinking of updating or creating a new record, say we did have a new hire coming in and we wanted to enter their data, we can enter that data, which will typically be in the form of a one-dimensional array aligning to the columns, of course. And then we just simply append the row, which makes a new row down there at the bottom. To show you what I mean, let's run this. We'll come back over here and you'll see that, well, we still have that Joe 56 thing. But what it did was it went to the bottom, the last row, and it appended the information within that one-dimensional cell. So we can actually take other data, change it into a one-dimensional array, which is a row, and then just populate that row. And this comes incredibly handy when you have a full set, essentially a full-blown employee database, and you have cells of like supervisor, date of hire, last performance date, rating, all the benefits information. This thing can become quite large, but if you had all the information and you stored it into a one-dimensional array, and then appended the row, you could just simply populate that. Now, there are other methods that we can search, and we'll get into these. We can search for a row by the index, because remember, this is all a two-dimensional array. So we can search by the index and say we're only looking for Beth. We can grab Beth's row and then do all sorts of things to it. We can change a value at a certain index. We can remove the whole thing if, say, Beth got terminated for whatever reason. We can remove that whole thing and move it over to another tab to archive, we can increase pay, and we don't have to actually go in, find Beth, and then enter it. We could actually do it through a different method over here in like a UI or something. So that's another way that we can set values. Before I end this video, because our next video, we are going to talk all about arrays. Since we are working with arrays a lot, I want to ensure that there's a good operational understanding of arrays and how to change arrays. Like we already know how to take a two-dimensional array and drop it down a level, and we can even drop it down further if we want. We also know how we can take a one-dimensional array and turn it into a two-dimensional array. But next video, what I want to do is show how we can, with Google Apps Script, push information to an array, whether we want to push it to the end, the beginning, may have time to do the middle, but the next video is all about arrays. Before I go though, what I want to do is create another script file, and I just want to call this reference. And what's going to be going in this reference is, you'll see that we're getting quite heavy here. So let's just comment all this out for now. And let's comment all this out. And what we're going to do is we are going to grab this. Let's just grab all of it here. We'll grab all of this. And what I'm wanting to do is simply come over here to reference. And I want to save all of this information here. Now, I'm wanting to save everything here just so you have it in case you want to come back and, refer to it. So now what we have is all this saved. We can save it. It's commented out. And if you ever needed to come back in here and think of, well, how did I reduce it or whatever? So this will just be our library of notes, if you will. And then what we can do is we can actually get rid of a lot of stuff in here. And I'll clean this up. Before the next series video, and that way we can just focus on specifically arrays. So again, if you like what we're doing, please hit that subscribe button. We can continue to bring you these. And if you do have any ideas on or requests on what it is that you would like to learn through an HR lens when it comes to Google Apps Script, HTML, CSS, or you just have a question of how in the world would I do this, please just drop us an email. The email is inside the description box, and we can either create a video or we can just chat offline. But thank you again, and we hope to see you next time. Please take care.